how the entire world could be beneficial to everyone, perhaps in the form of what an antibody would be. And then a diagonal is the most simplest way to equalize the most complex structure. When in terms of what Hollywood could seem in special effects, a silver lining can be brought to the forefront by the most simple diagonal. And in a sound design, the difference of a special effect in that is trying to couple them as closely together as possible so that it seems real. Dude, I'd fancy myself getting half of every image of real footage and slicing a diagonal so that half of it is CGI and then the other half is just real, and just baking those two in each time frame, because the video is a motion picture and is broken up into tiny segments. So in each one of those, if they were split with a diagonal and matching the sound script to any deviations of flashes, every image you're seeing is captured by light. So substantially, if you bake it together, is going to be flashes all about the brightest points, those of which could be utilized as the homeostasis of special effects. It's like the yeast to bread. So I was just experiencing earlier was an open field where the wind brushes about it so much that it picks up on itself of each other, like a double jump on a trampoline. Now what I just explained was something of how vacuums work. And if you're working to explain what a vacuum is, that's as nonsensical as trying to deter an accelerant. But what's the most natural accelerant? Would you undermine what the entire world is to have a natural component into a synthetic detriment? How much wind is it on a day-to-day basis? Can that be utilized better than a windmill? So when a woman gets pregnant, she has to push a body out of hers. How scary could that be? It would be almost as if you wanted to get it over with, but then as soon as it's time, you suddenly don't want to because it's scary. Doctors, on the other hand, if they don't want to get it out and they're sick of waiting with all the time, they perform a C-section, and it's not as natural, but then that's their decision in order to be safe and effective. And that's what the studies show. And this was just like in a study that shows, and I don't know if it's been fact-checked by your favorite corporation, but within the study that showed the so in a beehive, there's these certain aspects of what in the center means, and inside the center of a beehive is where the nursing bees have tiny larvae, and substantially it's meant for a safeguard, whereas if you blow out the middle, the outsides are to crumble. And so when within scavenging for food, the wiser older bees would have it that they would show the scavengers to look out from the outsides to find stuff, because the hive had parasites and mites infestating. And so they would be grooming each other like monkeys would. And so then they saw that when they were grooming each other, that the ones that were infected, but it said that when the infected were let out from the cage, it was that they were then social by touching the antennas with others and sharing regurgitated food. And then it made it seem so risque. Things that might look quirky, such as stuff strewn about, even though it picks up a reflection of a silver lining, could be orchestrated just as well as a hard drive. And actually, the information within quarks of atoms are a hard drive within that nucleotide. So what kind of stuff am I dealing with that's so difficult to talk about? What this might look like is if all your white blood cells spontaneously combusted, if you went outside and you weren't supposed to, your hair turned orange, all your teeth fell out. And so I was reading a magazine where the study shows how it was categorizing humans as animals within bees, how they both are undergoing a type of social distancing. And it kind of was treating the bees as if they were kind of stupid, wherein the bees have this communication skill where they do communication by dancing. And so when one bee got infected and it got back out and it was socially interacting with the other bees, it was almost as though it was trying to share the information with what it had obtained, perhaps in the form of what an antibody would be. And so when we're undermining that bee for going out and doing the social activity after it was infected, it reminds me of how bad it is whenever there's sirens and ambulances going off and no one around can do anything because we don't know until the day after on the newspaper or how it's covered on the news what bad thing occurred in order to get them there. And so the more things aren't watered down with like adding in tainted products that are just made cheaper, the more that things are actually articulated and built great, you're able to read the land better. And this is no surprise that when people have come up with great ideas across the entire earth, another person has come up with that same idea at the same time. I think that's how shortwave radio was created. And then more than often, it's just like how Calculus 2 was like two guys. It was like Newton and then this other guy. They both had the idea of calculus at the same time. So it's argued like who had it first. And this is a relation of how bees dancing is, how they're able to read it, but with our brains, it's got like a hybrid state of dancing and wavelength. And so if the dance of the siren and the lights, and if you could even look at the driver of the vehicle, and we were as smart as bees were in their communication skills with body language, we could utilize those components of the emergence and be able to read it exactly what they've been told over their phone to go and help them with what, where, when, how, why. Because there's a dance of sound and light that is known as a Doppler shift, and the communication of that such can be read as particles of light, photons. The way that they bounce about in a small scale is like sand on a vibrating plate. If you've done that, you see that they form different shapes that are definite shapes. It isn't random. And this is in terms of like a chaotic dystrophy, how snowflakes are when they go up and back around, and then they only fall once they obtain a certain shape. And if you look at the snowflake, it's definitely like symmetric, but there's no two same snowflakes, despite their having categories of snowflakes that fit into groups of snowflakes together that look identical. The same scape is of the vibrating plate of the sand, it always forms certain shapes that can be grouped together, but it's just as instead of a vibrating plate, a snowflake is vibrating in the air and the wind and doing its dance about the clouds before it falls down.